So, as chief of staff and certainly as a coach, storytelling is just part of it. You can't not have it. And you are the storyteller of the company in a lot of ways because you stand up there
Oh,
speaking on behalf of the company. You are
yeah.
certainly a storyteller or messenger from the CEO. So you are delivering messages and telling stories in a compelling way from the
Wow.
office of the CEO. And the story changes slightly depending on who you're talking to.
That was the voice of leadership coach, longtime chief of staff, and now chief of staff whisperer, and two-time author Emily Sander. Emily is my guest this week on the Page and Stage podcast, and with a slightly different angle this week, we're going to talk about storytelling and artistry from the business point of view. How to take those elements of story and narrative and character and interpersonal relationship and apply those to a business setting. So that's going to be really cool. A whole new way to think about story and character and art. We're going to get to that in just a second. First, a quick update. I am recording this on Saturday, June 22nd, here in my little East Village Airbnb without all my fancy microphone equipment that's back home in Sarasota. So if it sounds a little bit different, that's why. But last night was our first paid preview of Clowns Like Me, the off Broadway production. We had actual, real live New Yorkers in the house. And actually, Emily flew all the way in to support me. She was here to see the show, the first preview last night. Such a wonderful thing to develop these friendships and relationships with clients, with colleagues. So much fun to have her here. She was right there in the front row for our first preview. And I will say this, New York audiences, a little bit different than Sarasota audiences. We're going to keep learning through these previews, but the show is in great shape. And if you're around New York, please come check us out. clownslikeme.com. We have previews running all next week, and we open June 30th. But as for Page and Stage today, which is, I'm talking into the future now, to next Monday, when this drops in your inbox, my guest is Emily Sander. On her website, Next Level Coaching, and all of her books and links I'll put into the show notes, she likes to say that she was made in Korea and assembled in the United States because she was adopted. She's a C-suite executive turned ICF certified leadership coach. She put in years in the high achievement hamster wheel in the business world. She has written books about leadership and about being a chief of staff. She's worked at Fortune 500 companies, private equity backed firms, scrappy startups, everything from Microsoft to Amazon to G2 Web Services to eMobis to Sterling Talent Solutions to Fusion Zone. And a couple years ago, she pivoted from being a full time chief of staff into being a coach and an author and a podcaster. She's the one that last week I sent you in the newsletter. It's her podcast that I appeared on last week. We call that in the business a pod swap. The most important thing, though, about Emily that she insists you know is that she is a die-hard fan of the Seattle Seahawks. And with all that in mind, here we go with my conversation with Emily Sander. So, this is going to be a slightly different angle on the Page and Stage podcast today. First, it is, as of this recording, the longest distance between interviewer and interviewee I have yet experienced. I'm in Florida, and my guest, Emily Sander, is all the way up near Seattle in Washington. We are intercontinental, well, cross-continental at least today. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's awesome to be here. Thank you for having me, Jason. I lived in Lakeland, Florida for 5 years, so I've done the Tampa to SeaTac run many, many a time.
And for all you listeners out there too, what's super fun here is that Emily and I actually work together. She is a chief of staff. I'll amend that. She was a chief of staff as a career, and she pivoted into coaching recently, very much like I pivoted from full-time theater into podcasting, writing, publishing. And we got connected and have been working together for, oh my goodness, how many months now, Emily? I can't even remember.
I think it's
It's been a
almost a
while.
year. I think it's like, yeah, that's unreal, but it's been amazing working with you and for all of those folks listening. Jason just makes me better, so that's what he coaches me on. He just helps me in all sorts of ways. So yes, about a year. I was just looking at that the other day.
Well, all right. So before we get into the nitty gritty of some of the storytelling angles of what you do, Emily, I just want to get everyone on the same page with who you are and why you're doing what you do.
give us a quick kind of origin story. And I use that term very specifically because I know Superman is one of your favorite
Mm.
characters. What is your Superman superhero origin story? What was your quick career path? How did you end up as a chief of staff? And then why did you pivot from being a chief of staff into coaching fellow chiefs of staff?
Holy cow, okay, so my whole
Big
life trajectory, here we go. So, at a very young age, I was born. No, so
question.
I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and then I was adopted as a small baby and brought over to the States and grew up in Seattle. And the Superman origin story is that when I was little and it was my dad's turn to read me a bedtime story, he was a huge fan of comic books. And so one of them was Superman, and I loved Superman. I just was drawn to him from the beginning. I loved that he used his powers for good and that he never gave up. And I liked that he went back to home to Kansas to talk to his parents and he had that grounding and then he and did what he needed to do. And as I got a bit older, there were, kids in school who were like, "You don't look like your parents, and that's not your real mom," and, like, that whole round of,
Yeah.
conversation, and there was a point where I was having a little bit of a rough time with that, and my dad, very sweetly, caught on to this, and he said, Em, Superman is adopted too." And he is. He is from Krypton, and he was adopted by a family, and, I was like, that just forever emblazoned Superman on my heart. So that's, I've tried to emulate Superman and, use my powers for good and never give up and all those things in my different roles, but went into went to the University of Washington, studied political science, which is a great degree you can not, can't do a lot with, but, I I went out to
But hey, you're
Washington
talking
D.C.
to a theater English major, so
Yes,
and I minored in religion and philosophy, so I got you with the great degree that is, like, completely
yeah.
useless.
My friend was like, "I studied English literature," and I was like, "Ooh, well, okay." But I went off to DC to do an internship, and that was just a good life experience. Came back, and that's when I really started my career. So, I took this confidential role at a tech company, and it was very kind of, like, vague and like, this a real thing?" Turned out to be a tester for the original Kindle device for Amazon.
Mhm.
And
Man, oh,
so
man.
that was like, holy cow. People back in 2007 didn't know like an e-reader what? What are you trying to do? But that launched right before Christmas in 2007, and then from there, through a series of circumstances, I worked for Microsoft and then a bunch of startup, small to medium technology businesses, and it culminated in my role as chief of staff, which is a strategic partner to the CEO and works on a whole bunch of cross department initiatives for the leadership team. I love that role, was very well suited to it. I just thrived in that. I actually wrote a book on that later on,
Right, I've read it.
and
Alright.
and came to a point where I was looking back at my career and said, "What are the favorite parts of all my roles I've had at all my positions?" And it was the interactions. It was the one-on-one, "Oh, I get to help someone and mentor them, guide them." "Oh, Jennifer didn't feel confident enough to speak up at team meetings, and now she does. Oh, Christian didn't think he was any good at presenting, and he just presented at our annual Risk Summit in London in front of 200 people." Like, those are the things that stuck with me. And so I was
Yeah.
like, "All right, that's a pretty clear answer that I came to pretty quickly. So, Emily, if those are the favorite parts of your day, what would it be like to wake up and do nothing but your favorite parts of the day all day long?" And so once I married that with coaching, I said, "All right, life is short. I'm going all in. So push all my chips on the table and let's do this coaching thing." And I've been doing that for the past 18 months, and it's going well, it's growing, it's getting traction, and I've gotten to meet a lot of cool clients and a lot of cool connections within the industry and a lot of very talented people like yourself who I feel privileged to have our journeys crossed. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's awesome. Great nutshell. And the Superman thing always just delights me because it's such an example of the power of a story to help someone learn something about themselves, to see themselves in a different way. We go to a stage to look at people up there and it's easier to like analyze and diagnose and cathartically experience what they're going through, even more so than in our own lives sometime. Same thing here. You're struggling, your dad reminds you, hey, Superman's he's an orphan, he's adopted.
Mhm.
And that's just that unlocks you. The power of that story of a comic book just unlocked you.
Well, it made being adopted something like, "Oh," like, I wasn't ashamed of it, but it was like, "Oh, this is embarrassing," or kind of a sensitive topic to, like, no, like, I'm proud of it now. I'm proud to be from Korea, I'm proud to be from America, like, I'm just it becomes something cool. So I remember that, like,
Yeah.
flip like that as a kid.
So cool. Chief of
Yes.
staff, because I know you make the podcast round, so you've probably been asked this a million times, so we're ready. What is a chief of staff and what do they do?
Yes. So good question. The easiest analogy I can use is the 6-pack cans of soda you get at the store
Mhm.
and the plastic thing on top of them that holds all the cans together. That is a chief of staff. They are the plastic thing that holds the executive team together. So they're like that connective tissue and it's
Yeah.
adaptable and flexible. And that's the short answer I give to people. The other analogies people can relate to are a Swiss Army knife of the leadership team, a utility infielder where, okay, Emily, I need you to smoke jump into this part of the business and fix it. And then I need you to come over here and do something completely different. And then I was just talking to someone and I said, it's like an air traffic controller. So that big tower at an airport where the guy like with the little headphones and like is sorting out all the planes and all the airlines and ground crew and they're orchestrating the whole thing. So they don't own the airport or they don't own the planes per se, but they're the conductor. That's another analogy, a conductor
Oh,
for an
yeah,
orchestra.
yeah.
But that's what a chief of staff does. So they do have a very special relationship with their principal, typically the CEO, and that's the person they report to. And the CEO, if they're having a bad day, if they want to have a conversation where they don't pull any punches, if they need to get something off their chest, if they need someone to give them a no BS answer, they can
Yeah.
turn to their chief of staff and have that person there. And then chief of staff, there's no one way or one version to be a chief of staff. So each iteration of chief of staff is a little bit different at each company, but generally they are that strategic partner to the CEO and they are running point on a lot of large cross company initiatives in conjunction with the rest of the leadership team.
Yeah, I'm guessing that probably I remember when we first met, chief of staff, I'm curious, so it's a two-part question. One, the most kind of popular iteration is probably from West Wing. Like, I remember it's so
Yes.
eerie, right? And it was very clear in that show, "Oh, chief of okay, yeah, I get it, I get it. It's the master fire putter outer." So talk about sort of the pop culturally influence, whether that comes into your work at all. Then also talk about sort of the trajectory of this idea of chief of staff. I know you've talked to me about how some CEOs are still resistant. Is it a relatively new idea? Is it just manifesting in different ways in business now? What is the trajectory of that job as an idea within business?
Yes. So, an extremely brief history of chief of staff would be going back all the way to the 14th and 15th centuries, where kings and generals would have a chief of staff like person right next to them. So, an advisor, or if you want to like go Game of Thrones on it, like the hand of the king or the hand of the queen, kind of the behind the scenes orchestrating the whole thing. If you look at kind of more modern examples, like Alexander Hamilton, like famous,
Right.
Hamilton, the play, but Alexander Hamilton played a chief of staff like role to George Washington. And
Mhm.
he was proactive and he saw the different things that George Washington was good at and also where he was not so good at and the gaps that needed to be filled. And he just proactively filled them. And so he served a chief of staff like role. Certainly today, the most common use is chief of staff to the president of the
Yeah.
United States. And West Wing, like everyone knows West Wing. So Leo McGarry, and there's lots of great scenes in that show with their interaction. One of the scenes that sticks out in my mind is when another character tries to create a wedge between the president and Leo McGarry, and the
Mm.
president basically says like, "Don't you dare!" And he says, "That is my chief of staff. If you try to undercut my chief of staff, you've got another thing coming." And so that's the kind of connection that a principal and a chief of staff have to have. But certainly in politics, in the military, it's more prevalent. But relatively recently, it's been showing up in the corporate world. And it's interesting because I speak with chiefs of staff all over the world, And certainly in the US and parts of Europe, it's pretty well known. It's becoming more well known. I was just speaking to someone in Singapore, and in that part of the world, it's nascent. It's like budding
Wow.
up. It's just about to sprout up, and people are still like, "Is that a executive assistant? Is that like what do you mean by chief of staff? What is that?" And so she was kind enough to say, "I one of the reasons I listened to your podcast, Emily, about the role of chief of staff is so I could explain it to people because you guys are ahead of us in certain ways with the role, and I want to be able to set it up well in Singapore and other parts of Asia," which I was like, "That's amazing." So I think in the US, it's becoming more prevalent and well known. So you don't get the like quizzical, huh? Look
Yeah.
from people. But it's also the version of chief of staff you can have varies widely. So, where that lands, where this role lands, I think is gonna settle out in the next 5 to 10 years. And
Mm.
so I'm really encouraged by some folks in the industry that are setting it up as a strategic role, not just kind of EA plus. Not that we don't love executive assistants, and not that we don't realize they run the world in
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah.
Um, but setting the chief of staff up to be that strategic role.
Great. So I'm going to pivot hard into the primary focus of this podcast, which is writing and performance. So, as a chief of staff, let's focus on the writing side first, right? Which is very much creating narrative or creating meaning out of things. And I'm assuming there's got to be memos or briefs or reports, or you have to deliver a message to this person or that person. And I'm wondering, in terms of the framing of the narrative, being this plastic six pack. Some people might say it's beer rather than soda, whatever, whatever floats your boat. But being this flexible, connective presence, how intentional do you find in the past and as you coach your clients now? How intentional do you have to be about telling the right story to the right person at the right time?
So as chief of staff and certainly as a coach, storytelling is just part of it. You can't not have it. And you are the storyteller of the company in a lot of ways because you stand up there
Oh,
speaking on behalf of the company. You are
yeah.
certainly a storyteller or messenger from the CEO. So you are delivering messages and telling stories in a compelling way from the office of the CEO. And the story changes slightly depending on who you're talking to, not in a manipulative or, in a bad way, but if you're talking to the engineering team about the CEO story. That's a slightly different angle than when you're talking to the marketing team or compliance, or certainly when you're telling the story of the company to strategic partners or investors or the media. Like all of those are different versions of the story. And so being able to say, all right, here's the story I'm telling, here's the information I want to get across, and who is my audience? How
Mhm.
do I deliver that so it lands in the most effective way or it lands how I intend it? Is certainly there's a art which you know all about, like a craft art of storytelling.
I'm just I'm trying to I loved what you said, and I don't really have a perfect question here, but you mentioned delivering a message for the CEO, from the CEO.
Mm.
And you have this message, thinking of messenger as storyteller, right? Because the message could be a simple thing from the CEO, but as you said, depending on who you have to say it to, you might have to say it completely differently because marketing speaks a different language than finance, than HR, than research and development. They all speak different languages and need different things from that same singular message. Can you think of maybe at a time in your career or maybe with a client where, without giving away confidentiality, but a time where one message had multiple versions, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly messages where let's say you're talking to the leadership team. So they're privy to certain information. They're probably privy to the most information
Oh, of
and
course.
them a little bit differently. So for instance, let's see, during COVID, that might be a good example where all right,
Mm.
just swirling like there's a tornado coming through here. We don't know what's happening. And the way we deliver the message and talk about it as a leadership team is in one way. The way we deliver that message to the rank and file staff in an all company meeting is different. Now, in that case, we want to be transparent and we want to be able to give people a sense of what's going on and the things we're looking at to make decisions. But that story arc might be a little bit different than when we're having kind of close quarters conversation. I think certainly when you're speaking to the media, in some cases, they will try to take things and make it their own story and everything, so you wanna be a little bit careful about how you tee that up, but they serve a purpose and we need them to get the message and an accurate message out there, and so there's just different things that you can do. I think what's another one? Sometimes, and I don't have a specific example, but sometimes there's a story, and for one group of people, that's a good news story, they're very happy to hear.
Oh, oh, of
Sometimes
course.
bad news story for others, and you're like, "Okay, so still wanna be transparent, still wanna deliver the facts, but the way you measure that and the way you deliver that changes."
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of it that way, but absolutely, this epic heroic story might be a tragedy for a different
Yeah,
department.
yeah.
And you have to go in and tell it both ways.
Mhm.
Oh, man. You've mentioned the relationship, the special relationship between a chief of staff and their primary, their CEO. And I remember you ran down a list for me once of all the different masks that you've had to put on, the different roles you've had to play for that CEO. And you mentioned it like even just a little bit ago about being the person who can give the hardcore no BS no answer. Talk through how many different characters you have to play, right? And again, you come in each day and you have to watch your charge. You have to watch your CEO closely and figure out what she needs, and not just what she wants, but what she actually needs, even if she doesn't know it. How many different characters do you think you play in that particular role?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. Like dozens, like dozens. I get like, let's see, okay. So there's, the support role, there's the confidant, there's the cattle prod, there's the executive therapist, there's the coordinator. So like I'm gonna help spearhead and coordinate. There's like the sweeper role, like go deploy me out where you need me.
Oh, yeah.
There's the truth teller, right? So truth to power, that's a big one. I'm delivering messages from the company, from the staff to the leadership team and to my CEO as well. So there's that
Yep.
direction. There is, yeah, like the BS meter, like hold on, stop. I'm calling BS. Like just stop right there. There's a whole bunch, and it kind of you just like you said, you have to come in and you generally know the personality and the persona of your principal over time, but as we all know, we shift day to day, week to week, and sometimes we're rested and sometimes we're not, and sometimes we're stressed and sometimes we're excited. So you kind of have to read that day by day, hour by hour, moment by moment, and not and take this in the right way, but like you become what they need and you
Yeah.
say, "Hey, how can I best support them?" And to your point, it's not what makes them feel good. It's like, what do we need to have happen here for the business, for the team as a whole? It might be me getting my CEO in position so he can do what he needs to do for the team. It might not be what he wants to do right now. It might be
Right.
having a hard conversation with someone and he's conflict avoidant, but that's what needs to happen. And he's the only person to do this in this particular spot. So, what does it take to make him feel comfortable and confident going into that situation? That's my role.
Emily, I want to take a hard right turn here. Part of what you found me to help you with was in performance, in presenting. Like you're working on a keynote. You don't want to just coach, you also want to get into whether it's TED Talks or presentations, workshops, getting up in front of an audience and delivering a message. You had some great fear at the beginning of
Yes,
the
indeed.
the public speaking angle, and that's one part of it. The other part of it is very technical. So I want you just to kind of play with both of these parts. There's the emotional interpretive part of being a public speaker. And then there is the super technical lips and tip of the tongue and teeth, the elocution, the breath work. And you've been working on both really, really, really hard. So I would love for you to share what that process has been like for you on either of those tracks, the more interpretive track and the more technical track. What are you going through? Where have you had breakthroughs? Where are you still struggling? Where are you still mad at me?
Yes, I mean, the beginning of the process on both of those fronts was, like, terrifying. So, as a little kid, I was painfully shy. So, if you were to have met me when I was, like, 2, 3, 4, 5, even, I was, like, clinging to my parents. I was painfully shy, like, getting a word out of me was just, like, pulling teeth. And I remember I had this great 1st grade teacher, Mrs. Bauer, and she said something that just, like, paradigm shift in my world, which was, "Emily, you're shy now." And I was like, "Yep, I'm shy." And she was like, "You don't have to be shy if you don't want. You can be another way." And I was like, "Oh, like light bulb, fireworks. Oh, okay." So that was like an opening up, like the first crack of the door being open. And then of course in business you have team meetings and you're leading things and you're presenting to the board and different partners and things like this. And so my experience through that was like grin and bear it and then drink afterward. And that was my like modus operandi to get through those things. I was white knuckling through those. And, I tried a couple times to get a coach and to work through that, but I really wanted to not be scared of it anymore. That was my
Right.
impetus going, you know what? Like this is part of the world I'm in, and I don't want to be scared every time I have to speak in public or up in front of a group. And then secretly, which you and I have talked about, I was like, maybe one day I could actually be a speaker, like a professional speaker, like a professional public speaker, and that could be something that I develop that skill and become good at. And there was something in there, like in the heart of hearts, like the back of my mind was like, yeah, like I don't think I can do that, but I kind of want to, like I want to try. And so, connecting with someone like you where I could be that vulnerable, I'm like, look, I understand I suck in these areas now, but I want to get good. And you're like, no, 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 like I can get you there, was just very freeing and opening and encouraging. But it was all the world's a stage, right? We all play our
Mhm.
part, the famous
Mhm.
Shakespeare line. And anyone listening to this plays their parts throughout their day. Like I go to work and I'm a chief of staff. I go to work, I'm a coach. I sit down on the couch watching Netflix with my family, like I'm a different role. I'm out
Mhm.
in the community, I'm out at the grocery store, I'm with my mom or dad or cousins, like those are all slightly different roles that you play. And so we're shifting in and out of these personas and putting on these different masks, even though hopefully the root character and who you are as a person is fundamentally the same, but we all have these different like tilts of the prism. And
Yeah.
so I think saying you can have a mask but also be true, and you could also play a part and find truth with another person, was a key insight that I have from working with you. So I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. So let me know if you can unpack that. But basically, you're not being a fake person if you're playing a certain role. Like we all play
Yeah.
roles out in the world. And to maybe close the distance between like this role and who I actually am, because there is
Yeah.
that kind of energy you have to spend to present a certain way. So if I have to go to work and have all the answers, like, meh, like I have to go to work and ask good questions. And me as Emily, I ask good
Mm.
questions. And then also knowing that, all right, and in your book, This Above All, which I love, people should go pick up Jason's book, This Above All. But I love the part where you talk about everything in theater is a lie. Like, it's all fake, and everyone knows it. Like, they walk into an artificial theater, they pick up the, bulletin and or playbill, and it's like, "Oh, I know who this person really is, but they're playing this part." Everyone knows it, but yet they go there and they pay money to see something true.
Yeah.
And just like you said, there was something true in that Superman story. There's
Mhm.
something true in watching a play and seeing these actors portray these different characters. So, trying to bring that back full circle, it's when you're playing these parts and you're interacting with a group or even one on one, there's still immense truth in that. And we're playing our parts, but we can find some truth and be real with each other. And so that's something that I've learned through our work together.
Yeah, it's almost like, and I say this, thank you for the plug. That
No problem.
in my book, I talk about the mask revealing more than it conceals. The
Yes, yes.
mask the mask keeps us safe. The mask helps us know in any particular moment, like right now, podcast interviewer, podcast host, or guest. And just last week I was on yours, and our
Yeah.
roles are reversed, and our responsibilities based on those roles change. And I think that's a big part of what the mask frees us to do. We don't have to worry about anything other than the responsibilities that that mask connotes.
Mm.
So when I put this one on, I'm free from having to figure out what to do. Now I know what to do. I have to fulfill what this mask is requiring in this moment. It's why formal legal speech exists, so that it keeps everyone safe. It's why there's mediators, right? It's the mask is that space that lets us still be completely ourselves,
Yes.
but in a very focused way for this moment. It's kind of how I think about it, and that's why I think the chief of staff role is just like you're putting on masks and taking them off like all
You're
the
a chameleon,
time.
yeah, you're evolving hourly by the minute, yes, but you're also always yourself, so I love that part of your book as well. But yeah, and the technical piece, you and I have had fun with that. "Bazaar, bazaar, bazoo, bazoo, bazoo."
All the warm up.
Unique New York, yeah, all this stuff. Int, ain't, eint, und. I look around and make sure no one's around before I do my warm-up, so I'm like, I am not a crazy person, I am just trying to articulate what I'm trying to say. But that part's been interesting because I didn't have, like, a speech impediment when I was a little kid, but I had my R's and my D's were a little bit muffled, and I would
Mm,
often, like, drop off at the end of sen I would mumble
yeah.
and, like, drop off at the end of a sentence, and so it sounded either like a question, "Am I on this podcast?" Like, I'm going up, like the upturn, or I just like, "I'm falling off a cliff, you can't hear me." So, being able to, like, land the end of sentences is something that I've worked on, and listening back to my podcast episodes or any talks that I do, I can hear the difference, and I'm like, "Oh, I just sound more clear. I just sound
Mhm.
more confident." And it's just literally by, "Emily, there's a T at the end of that word, you gotta say 'tuh' at the end," or, "Emily, there's a D, like, that's a sound at the very end, don't, like, muffle it or close it off." And so
Yeah.
just little things like that, and I can tell that my mouth and tongue are moving differently now because I've worked up some new muscles where it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh," and you've explained, like, "All right, here are the sounds you make in the back of your throat, in the middle of your mouth, and frontal sounds." And so now I just have an understanding of where and how that's happening, so as I'm formulating sentences or as I'm preparing a talk or reading something that's written for me, I just have a better foundation to work from. But it's been very interesting because there's been the physical side and the changes I've seen there, and then the mental emotional side of I am a speaker, and
Yeah.
or my story to myself was, "You are a bad speaker, and if you have to do this, you can get through it." Now it's like, maybe I'm okay, like, maybe I'm actually good, and, "Oh, in this circumstance, I was above average, so, alright, so that's a new storyline, let's go with that narrative and play that movie back over and over if we're gonna play something over and over and over again in our head." So, it's been a really fun journey, and I think that I'm so glad I did it because if I hadn't, I would still be where I was and I would still be stuck and I would still be fearful every time I had to speak. And now I still get a little twinge of nervousness, certainly, but it's
Yeah.
almost like I look forward to it in like a weird,
Yes.
almost perverse way. It's like I know I'm gonna feel nervous. I know I'm gonna sweat more than I want to, but I'm looking forward to this and I like getting my message out there. I like meeting people and I like being able to say no. I mean, I'm not am I gonna be Tony Robbins tomorrow? No, but I can hold my own in an
Yeah.
interview, in a talk, in meeting people. So I think that has opened up a lot of doors for me internally and also externally out in the real world.
Yeah, great. And that little twinge of excitement, even what you call it, right? What's the story we tell ourselves? I'm a
Mhm.
bad speaker. No, I'm an improving speaker. And so immediately that pre-show energy, which only proves you care, that's all that energy is. It's proof that you care, changes from nervousness to excitement, anticipation, right? It's the same energy. We've just named it differently. And so we experience it differently. It's like you're putting a different mask on that little ball of energy.
Well, that experience is key because I remember I was doing I host my own podcast and I first couple episodes, oy vey, like that's just a slow motion train wreck. They're out there if people wanna listen, but holy smokes. And it was interesting because I knew where I was in the process. I was like, "Emily, these first 5, even 5 to 10, they're gonna suck. They're gonna suck bad. You're gonna look back at these and be embarrassed, but that's part of the process. You have to
Right.
start and put the reps in." And I remember I got to a point where I was okay at interviewing guests. Like, when I had a guest on, it was more like a conversation. My first one still needed work, but those were okay. Speaking direct to camera on the
Mm,
solo episodes, like,
mm.
nearly did me in, man. My first couple, it was like, "All right, take 47, here we go," and that's like that number is not an exaggeration. It was like,
Oh,
"Let
I
me
know. I know. I listened to a lot of them.
holy smokes," like, it was a multi-day effort, and my friends were like, "Emily, didn't you say that was, like, your 30-second trailer?" And I was like, "Mhm. don't have it right yet. So, but I remember something you said, which was, you asked me like, when you get ready to go and you're looking at the camera, like, what are you thinking? Like, what's your swing thoughts? Like a golfer, what's your swing thought? And I was like,
Mhm.
this is terrible. I'm bad at this. Like, I just want to make this be over. Like, can this not suck anymore? And you were like, all right, we're going to replace that and say, I love doing this. I love doing this. I get to do this. This is a
Mhm.
podcast. Not everyone has a podcast. Not everyone gets to do this. I get to do this. I love what I'm doing. And I would say that right before I would go on camera. Now, at the beginning, it was a complete lie. I was like,
Of
this
course.
is not true one iota. But I was like, I love doing this. I love doing this. I love doing this. I get to do this. I love doing this. And you were like, the camera is your friend. Like it's a good friend. It loves what you're saying, all those things. And so I would do those things out of rote kind of checklist process. But then after a while, I was like, no, I kinda do like doing this, or, "Oh, no, he's my friend. He's my friend. I might name my camera. He's my friend." You know, all these things, and now I will tell you, this is no lie, right before so that was a loud snap, sorry. Right before I jumped on here, I rattled off 4 solo episodes. 3 of them were one-take wonders. That's
Whoa!
a personal record for me. That's, like, unheard of, Jason. Unheard of. You know me, like, a year ago, 9 months ago, no way that was gonna happen.
Oh, yeah,
So,
no, the
come
Dropbox
a
was
long way.
bulging with takes. No, that's incredible, and I love what you're saying here, Emily, about it's such a mindset shift, but it goes back to the story we tell ourselves, how
Yes.
we frame it, and even your also your investment in the repetition, whether that's rehearsal, whether you're a writer, a memoirist, a public speaker, whatever your storytelling modality is, if you're not doing something connected to that basically every day, then you're not really improving. I want you to talk a little bit about this because it's not just you're not just working with me, you're not just working to a camera. You found a Toastmasters, you have thrown yourself in front of your pastor begging to read the scripture each week at church. You have gone out of your way to seek out the thing that terrified you. You have like gone out and embraced it. I'm going to go to Toastmasters. I'm going to get up in front of my congregation and say these holy words. Talk a little bit about the process you went through, both emotionally and technically, with those two settings.
Yeah. Words that I never thought I would hear. Like, I was begging to get up in front of a congregation. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. I don't have like, I'm pausing because I'm asking, like, why do I do that? It's scary, it's, like, fearful, like, why did I do that? I don't have a good answer. What is my answer to that? So, I was scared of speaking, but I was more scared of getting to the end of my life and not having conquered that.
Yeah.
I wanted to be comfortable and safe was not speaking and, like, avoiding those occasions at all possible costs, but I wanted to tell a story more. So it wasn't that I wasn't scared, but I wanted that more, and so I think,
Mhm.
"Alright, know how this goes, I know what I need to do, let me just start, get the reps in, and put myself in these positions to be able to do that," and so I guess that's what I did, but yeah, I've never kinda thought about it that way.
Emily, I always like to wrap up with a couple questions and a spotlight. And the first question I have for you is what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
For me, it was, "Emily, stop overthinking," because I overthink everything.
Ah,
I get on a little hamster wheel, and I go, and I go, and I go, I go. And so, I think not overthinking and just being in the present moment. I think actors are very good at that, right? Because you're having to do this for the first time, even though you've done it, like, 1,000 times, it's gotta be
yeah.
fresh, and it's gotta be new. And so, being grounded and being really open to what's happening around you and what people are saying to you is key. But those are the biggest ones. I remember my mom and dad when I was young, they were like, "Trust your instincts and come up with good fails. Like, you're gonna fail in life, but make it good."
Oh, yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, and make sure it makes you a better person and you progress and you use that, you don't just stop. And so that's something that I probably take for granted. I do that automatically now, but not everyone does.
Yeah. It reminds me of what's that Samuel Beckett quote? Try, fail, try again, fail better. I totally
Yes.
butchered that, but it's something like that. But
Like
yeah,
like
to
fail
find
forward, yeah, like
fail
fail up, all
forward,
those
right.
things, yeah, fail fast, yeah, all that stuff. So, I mean, that's how you learn. I mean, that's I mean, I just gave you an example of the takes and, that's
Yeah.
I sucked at the beginning, but then you take a little bit and you learn from it, like what worked there, what didn't, all right, and it becomes better. So, and I'm only assuming that actors, directors, and people who watch plays, that's a similar process for them too.
What is the worst advice that you have ever given?
Oh, that I've given. Okay, there's one that's coming to mind, but it was like, "Be yourself," and then this dude went into the meeting and, like, let loose an outburst with, like, racial epithets and, like I was like, "Oh, no, I didn't know you were gonna do that, like, don't be yourself." And that's just I was like,
Oh,
"Oh,
no.
oh, shoot." So
I didn't know who
that was just
yourself was.
yeah, but yeah, what else? The worst advice I've given. Yeah, that story pops out in my mind. I'm sure I've given, like, crap advice all over there. But I think maybe it's when I say, like, "Do it this way." Like, it needs to be done
Oh,
this way and only this way, when really what I try to do now is say, "Here's, like, the outcome that we're trying to get to. You do you on the how. Like, here's the what, and then you do figure out the how." Before I was like, "I'm going to micromanage you, so you're basically going to be a little replica of me and do everything I do just, like, under my iron fist," and that was horrible advice.
I'm gonna tag on here really quick just because you spend your days coaching, and I'm curious if there's gonna be 1 or 2 moments that stick out in your mind as a coach where you just tapped into the whatever the muse is, or like you received like the brilliant lightning strike from God of this is the perfect thing to say to this person at this moment. A moment of inspiration or 2 from your coaching sessions. Or an ancillary, do you have back pocket advice that you give in a coaching session that you find tends to really be helpful to someone who's struggling to figure out how to be that six-pack holder?
Yes, those are interesting questions. I mean, I certainly in coach school, through my training, they give you classic coach questions, but there has been times where I'm like, you're in coaching, you're trained to stay in the moment. So you're trained not to like think of your questions ahead, but like just kind of let it develop. But there's
Ah,
been times when someone like pauses and you're like, oh, like that kind of like ding. And it's like, here, I'm gonna offer this to you. And like you can tell from their face, the reaction, like paradigm shift. Oh my gosh, Emily, I never thought about it that way. Oh, I'd never seen it from that perspective. So those days where you open up a whole new portal for someone is like, "Yes, I've done my job." And or when someone goes, "Oh, I have to think about that." Okay. So then you're on when they don't have like a ready canned answer. It's like, and they pause, get that pause, that's when you know you've keyed into something. But, yeah, there's been being a coach, at least for me, is the full gamut where it's like, "Oh, expletive, I don't know what to say." Like, I don't have anything good to say. "Let me try this. Is this, like, gonna work?" And then there's someone like, I have I have a question I think could really help this
yeah,
person unlock something." And in coaching, the question isn't about you or your perspective or what you wanna get across. It is, what question is going to help my client best to get to where they wanna go? And so
yeah.
sometimes you gotta, like, I think I like, in this situation, I would wanna do this, but that's not the point. The point is, for this person, right now, right where they are, what question is best or what observation is best to help them get to where they wanna go?
That again comes back to focusing on the correct story. You're a coach, but it's not your story.
Nope.
It's the client's story. And you have to identify where in their story they are and what are they in a point where you need to throw an obstacle in front of them, or do you need to give them a helping hand? Because sometimes you need to force them to climb over it, right? You have
Yes.
to it's almost like you have to figure out and write the story just a step ahead of them so that they end up doing the thing that's going to unlock whatever it is they're trying to find.
Yeah. And the way into that is, so different for each and every person.
Yeah.
I have clients in very, very similar situations at work, but to unlock it for them as an individual takes something wildly different. So, our experiences, our backgrounds, our biases, our everything, all of that together makes us unique individuals. And so I could never apply the exact same set of questions in like given circumstance because they're different individuals. So I love coaching. One of the main reasons I love coaching is because I get to hear stories. I get to hear people's stories, and they tell me a little bit about them and where they are in their story and where they want to get to. And I kind of see myself as, they're the hero. It's their story. They're Luke Skywalker. I'm Yoda. I'm the guide kind of helping them along. But I get to help them. I get to be a part of co-creating a chapter or even a paragraph or even a sentence of their story. And that's a privilege, and it's just fun because I love theater, I love movies, I love books, I love stories, and getting like a live action version of someone's story and being a part of that is really cool. And that's a big reason why I coach.
That's fantastic. All right, Emily, spotlight for you. For listeners out there, where can they learn more about you? Maybe they need a coach, but let everyone know how to find you, where your podcast is, your website. Where can they learn more about Emily Sander?
Yes, the best place to go is my website. It's the hub of information. So it's nextlevel.coach. So next level, all one word, .coach. And my podcast is called Leveraging Leadership. And you can find that wherever you get podcasts.
Awesome. Emily, thank you so much. What a joy to talk with you this way.
Yes, this is on a Friday, and I was looking forward to this one. It makes my Friday, and this is definitely a different podcast and a different show than I normally do, but it was so refreshing, and I loved your questions, and it's been just a fun conversation, so thank you.
The Page and Stage podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the episode summaries. If you enjoyed and found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.